Those who trekked across the country to begin new lives in the Old West were known for their resourcefulness, and it shows in many of the foods they ate. While pioneer cuisine may seem strange to us today, the settlers had no choice but to use what they had to survive, and they got pretty creative. Life in the Wild West was unyielding, journeys were long, and settlers had no guarantees the food they packed on a wagon train would last until their final destination. During that journey, pioneers hunted local wildlife and used replacement ingredients that traveled well. For instance, they employed apple cider vinegar to create a passable pie and preserved everything they could. They also used every part of the animals they ate. Head cheese, anyone? Perhaps they even polished off a meal with scamper juice, one of many colorful Old West slang terms. Much of what cowboys ate was born of necessity rather than preference. Yet, a cup of calf's foot jelly or a plate of roasted squirrel might have been considered a genuine culinary delight.
Coffee? Real coffee was scarce in the Wild West, so pioneers used many coffee substitutes. To replicate the essence of coffee, pioneers ground up everything from chicory roots to acorns. One of the more creative alternatives was made with sweet potatoes. First, they would cook and peel the sweet potatoes, mashing them before mixing them with rye flour to form patties. These patties were then carefully dried in ovens. Once sufficiently hardened, the mixture was ground into a fine powder and added to water. While sweet potatoes were not considered a great substitute for coffee, they served as a workable solution during times when traditional supplies were scarce. Roast skunk. Most of us would never consider eating skunks today, but in the Old West, pioneers were compelled to utilize any available food sources. Skunks, found across a diverse range of habitats spanning the United States, Canada, and Mexico, offered a surprising amount of meat despite their smaller size compared to livestock like pigs or sheep. An old pioneer recipe book even featured instructions on how to prepare roast skunk, accompanied by a crucial caveat. The removal of scent glands was an essential prerequisite before cooking. Sheep sorrel pie. Sheep sorrel pie, contrary to its name, does not feature any mutton. Instead, it's just another example of pioneer creativity. Lemons were scarce on the vast prairies, prompting cooks to turn to a local plant known as sheep sorrel for a creative solution in pie making. In lieu of actual lemons, finely shredded sheep sorrel leaves were incorporated, gave the pie a flavor close enough to the real thing when in a pinch. Calf's foot jelly. Though many Americans would probably prefer to eat Jell-O today, calf's foot jelly was a popular dessert in the Wild West. Its preparation involved an assortment of ingredients: the feet of calves, hooves removed, eggs, sugar, lemon, and spices. To create this dish, cooks commenced by boiling the calf's feet, followed by the addition of white wine, a selection of seasonings, and egg whites. Remarkably, one Virginia recipe book even instructed cooks to crush eggshells and include them in the mixture. Vinegar pie is also known as desperation pie. During times when fresh produce was in short supply, pioneers employed ingredients such as apple cider vinegar to replicate the flavors of apples and lemons in their pies. This vinegar, known for its medicinal and cleaning uses, gives the pie a tart apple or citrus flavor, which was deemed a satisfactory substitute for travelers navigating wagon trails. Remarkably, vinegar pie endures in contemporary kitchens, with even Martha Stewart featuring a recipe. Nevertheless, her version opts for butter in the crust instead of the likely pioneer choice of lard. Head cheese. Because bears are so large, they provided a significant amount of meat to pioneer families, which included the bear's head. Some pioneering cooks used it in a recipe that some modern consumers might know: head cheese. It's worth clarifying that head cheese does not contain any actual cheese. Rather, it involves boiling down the meat from the animal's head, seasoning it, and placed into a mold to cool. Once set, it is removed from the mold and thinly sliced. Crafting head cheese served as a practical means for pioneers to ensure that no useful part of the animal went to waste. Prairie oysters. Recognized more commonly as Rocky Mountain oysters, prairie oysters are an infamous dish from the West, both past and present. It's important to note that they bear no relation to actual oysters. Rather, they are the testes of young calves, removed during the neutering process. Cowboys, back in the day, would meticulously peel, battered, and fried them on the spot, savoring them as a culinary delight. Prairie oysters are still consumed in rural ranching states today, where annual testicle festivals celebrate this colorfully named snack. Acorn bread, the Wild West. The pioneers were clever when it came to substituting fresh fruits, coffee, and flour. They used things discovered in their new environments, or more often, ingredients Native Americans taught them about, to replace diet staples. Pioneers often turned to ground acorns as a substitute for flour in crafting acorn bread. To prepare these acorns, they would first roast them to mitigate their strong and irritating bitterness. Following roasting, the acorns were ground into a fine powder and combined with other ingredients to create a satisfying flour alternative. Beef tea? Beef tea is exactly what it sounds like. Thin strips of beef lightly salted and simmered in water to produce a liquid akin to beef broth. After boiling for a span of 1 to 2 hours, this concoction was strained and served warm. Recipes for beef tea trace their roots back to the 1700s, and it was frequently used as a supplement for those who were ill or had weak constitutions. It was also believed to stimulate the appetite. When beef was scarce, resourceful cooks turned to alternatives like lamb, chicken, and occasionally vegetables to craft their own versions of this tea. Frizzled beef. In the culinary repertoire of the settlers, frizzled beef held a prominent place, and it persists in some American communities to this day. This robust dish consisted of thinly sliced dried meat cooked in a blend of milk, butter, and flour, then generously ladled over toast. These ingredients were notably easy to transport across the vast expanses of the Old West, and with the exception of milk, the recipe featured non-perishable components. It's worth mentioning that this dish has a more crude nickname used by the military: shit on a shingle, jackrabbit. The abundance of jackrabbits in the Old West rendered them a readily available and easily captured source of lean meat. Settlers embraced jackrabbit meat as they would any other meat, seasoning and roasting it to their liking. Subsisting on rabbit meat alone, however, did cause one problem for the early settlers. Some individuals began to suffer from what is now known as protein poisoning, a condition arising from a diet excessively rich in protein but deficient in other essential nutrients. Because jackrabbit meat is so lean, the settlers weren't getting much fat along with their protein. This condition, although calorically sufficient, replicated the symptoms of severe hunger. Squirrel. For settlers in the Wild West, fresh meat was a hard-won prize. Carrying it on wagon journeys was an impractical endeavor, as there were no means to prevent it from spoiling. So they hunted when they could. Curiously, in certain locales, squirrels were a more readily available source of food than deer or buffalo, though harder to hit without damaging the tiny amount of usable meat. Hunters devised a peculiar method for capturing squirrels: barking them out of trees, which meant clipping the bark off the branch beneath them, causing the animals to fall. Frying pan bread, skillet flatbread. On the arduous wagon trails of the Old West, pioneers didn't have ovens, at least not the way we think of them today. During their travels, they would have cooked bread and biscuits in a frying pan. This culinary technique gave rise to the aptly named frying pan bread. These biscuits differed significantly from the ones we're accustomed to today, as the pioneers used wholemeal flour rather than white pastry flour. Consequently, the resulting bread possessed a denser, more filling quality, a good thing since food needed to satiate appetites for as long as possible. Chuck wagon, beef, and beans. While perhaps not particularly surprising, other than the fact that it might be surprising that they had to resort to a lot of the other things on the list when beef and beans were sometimes plentiful. The cowboy standard of beef and beans wasn't so much a recipe as it was a staple of everyday life on cattle drives in the Wild West. Many cowboys of the time endured monotonous days where they would eat a combination of beef and beans, two provisions that lent themselves well to preservation and transport. These humble staples often made up all 3 meals of the day, occasionally accompanied by sourdough, breed, and wild game, but always complemented by a steaming cup of coffee.
Please like and share if you find the video content interesting and useful. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment below so as not to miss the upcoming interesting videos. Thanks for watching.